You guys are
Yeah.
definitely more about just making sure that the Voynich code continues to be one of Portugal's up and coming best and most prolific bands in recent times, most prolific acts, which I honestly admire. I admire and I respect with every fabric of my being, because I know that very much like Ginger being the prolific band for Ukraine, or maybe Behemoth being a very, very prolific band for Sweden/Norway. I know you guys are going to be the prolific band for Portugal, and I cannot wait to see you climb. I cannot wait to see you boys collectively climb the ranks. And simply said, I was grateful to have the opportunity to record this session, just putting that out into the universe. So incredibly grateful, as I am as in love with Insomnia as I am. So now I think it's a very, very good segue to go ahead and go under the skin of Insomnia. Now, what this means is, with the help of Nelson in session, what we are looking to do is tell any behind the scenes stories about Insomnia, but most importantly, talk about the stories, tell the stories that this album mainly revolves around, orbits around. Things that were happening to Nelson at the time of writing this album, things that were very, very raw, personal, emotional to him, but of course, without digging too far. Of course, I would love for this to be a full-fledged Bloody Eagle lobotomy, right? But at the end of the day, oftentimes there are stories that coincide with these songs that might still be a little bit difficult to talk about. So, of course, let me know when you're not wanting to dig a little bit deeper per se into your songs, but otherwise, let's dig under the skin of Insomnia. And then I kind of want to enter us into an imaginary scenario. We're going to kind of revolt. We're going to kind of resort to the usual library analogy. Because the album cover done by the legendary Kalen Stokermans, shout out to Kalen, as we hosted him on the podcast, one of my favorite opportunities of all time, wanting to be a calligraphist as well as a graphic artist, making paintings, making Renaissance paintings and Romantic era paintings like he has. You have this beautiful album cover with this man. He seems to be in distress. He seems to be far away enough from a patch of forest, a patch of woods set on fire. There's a bird next to him. There's a chalice next to him. There are all these interesting items, but most importantly, you have at the top, maybe as opposed to how it is on public domain on Spotify, where you have the Voynich code, you have Insomnia underneath it. We just see Insomnia on the front. The author is the Voynich code. You're like, okay, this is interesting, because you happen to find this book in the library. You're like, this looks really cool. I have no idea what it is, though. You turn it over, and well, there's that small chunk of text that compels anybody in the library to possibly want to read this book. And well, if they don't like the summary and how things are kind of compressed, where it counts, depending on how much there is in the book, how many chapters there are in the book, there is that small chunk of text on the very back of the book. Nelson, to you, what would the chunk of text read on the back of the book? And then most importantly, afterwards, let's go ahead and dig into the meaning and the story behind how the album art was made. Take it away, sir.
That's very interesting, and I can say this is probably the most interesting interview I've ever seen, or podcast that I've ever seen in my life.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome. You're welcome. You should thank yourself for all this work. This Insomnia digs deep, very, very deep into a lot of pain and suffering that has been accumulated in my mind, body, and soul throughout my 32 years of existence that were completely hidden and that I was unaware of. The fact that I developed a sleep disorder and tried to seek assistance for that actually makes a lot of that pain pop up and actually make me aware of why, of who, and what happened during all these years of pain and suffering. Um, it dissects a bit of everything and the least amount of songs possible. But as every single song I write, it's heartfelt. It's very true to myself and my story. It's very metaphoric. Is that the word?
Yeah,
Metaphoric?
metaphoric.
Yeah. It's very metaphoric, and I try to build it almost as a story. But now apparently it's a book.
Right. So one way that you can probably compact this text then would be to say, true to the title, and I quote, true to the title, Insomnia is an acknowledgement of all that left me sleepless over these last over these last 32 years, colon, but not only that, comma, insomnia was me forcing myself to acknowledge these things, comma, unearthing them, comma, facing them head on, comma, and then possibly discovering beautiful imagery and compressing that into sound, period, end quote, or something like that. Would that work pretty well?
Exactly that. Exactly that.
Cool.
You can write it if you want.
Right. Fantastic. Well, in that case, we now have that chunk of text on the back of the book. And I mean, come on, people. We're talking about Kaylin Stokerman. So, of course, I don't know about you guys, the listeners, but I would personally like, it's very interesting to resort to that library, that novel analogy, because you never know. In a next door dimension, all of the albums that we've ever heard, there could be no music, but instead it's all books instead, right? And you think of all these albums, and instead of it being the jewel case CDs that we're all familiar with that break very, very easily if you drop them a couple times, right? And then you have the very, very thin lyric book that also kind of has the album cover printed on it, or sometimes you have better examples, you have surprise examples like Architects and their 2018 album Holy Hell, where you pull out a very, very freaking thick lyric book and that it unfolds into the A1 poster, like shit like that. But nonetheless, instead of CDs, what if all the albums we've ever listened to were books instead? And instead, the only sound that you could compress would be the sound that you kind of like project inside of your head. Like that shit's very interesting to think about to me. But I mean, after all, that's an almost infinite amount of commentary regarding a next door dimension where somehow sound, compressed sound, and artificially produced sound doesn't exist. Mark? Well, this is the Anatomy Podcast. This is a music-oriented podcast as opposed to a very soft, gently spoken ASMR podcast where we read through these albums as if they're books, right? But most importantly, talking about the art, man, I think Insomnia's album cover does one of the best jobs among Kaylin Stokerman's many pieces of depicting an authentically Renaissance piece. But I definitely can tell. I can notice the different things going on in the piece that makes it Insomnia. So, of course, we don't exactly have Kaylin Stokerman's here in call with us tonight. And hopefully in the future, we can grab some time with him and talk about this album cover. What's up? Yeah. They can't see you. Yeah, no, not yet.
Can they hear me?
Yeah, they can.
Hi, this is Sean's mom.
This would be Dear Mother.
Hi.
We've been going for quite a bit of time now.
Yeah.
Where we're talking about their album though, so I'll be downstairs in a little bit.
Good luck, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, he calls me a hobbit.
I do, because she's a very
hobbit.
short woman.
I'm a say 5'2". That's not short.
That's great because our Portuguese are very short as well. So
There you go. So we were, we're not able to exactly host Kaylin Stokerman's in session tonight, but I think that's something we're going to be making an adjustment to in the near future. Like, basically, because we've already had him on, it's like, can you please join us for the podcast session? That way we can do back to back, like just bouncing back and forth commentary regarding the creative process of this piece. But from what you can recollect upon when you were first talking with Kaylin about this piece, what made this album cover the right piece, the right fit for an album called Insomnia? And what were some of the more prevalent details in the album cover that you emphasized from the very beginning, that you're like, this is what Insomnia looks like? Take it away, sir.
okay, so the initial concept for visuals of the cover have nothing, well, have very few elements that actually got to the cover, the final cover. My idea, since I had Insomnia, the title already defined, my idea was a cover of a cave where you would see a bear hibernating, and you could, from that perspective, you could see the outside of the cave, and you could see the forest completely burning and birds flying away. This was my initial concept, which would represent the fact that there was complete chaos around something so beautiful as sleep and innocence and
Vulnerability, even.
vulnerability. Exactly. But being that he is such an artist, he decided to brainstorm with us and try to get better elements that would represent my idea, since in his point of view, this idea in a design perspective would be hard to achieve and make the viewer understand what actually is happening.
Fair enough.
And we obviously accepted his expertise. We brainstormed a bit with him, and I remember him actually turning around and to his bookshelf and taking books out just to see elements that would represent the emotions and everything that I was trying um, to actually explain that I wanted on the cover.
Yeah.
And eventually we talked front to back, as in, what about this? What about that? And we came to a conclusion of a base idea that he eventually later on sketched. And again, being the amazing artist that he is, just a simple sketch was right on, that's it. Just let's go with that idea.
Yeah.
And very few minor details were changed, if I recall correctly. But the base idea that he sketched initially is what you see.
Right.
And that's why, from the elements that I had initially thought of, you have the fire, you have the animals, but then you have other elements, the chalice and whatnot, the snake, um, and all of this represents, in a certain way, those emotions and the idea that I initially wanted um, to pass through in a better way in
Yeah.
his vision, obviously.
And of course, I definitely don't want to push and shove one creative mind to another. But of course, there are many details about this album cover that don't exactly scream Insomnia to me. And I remember when me, Andre, and Vinny were doing the first half of this podcast session, I think I remember them saying that the album cover isn't really meant to depict insomnia, other than maybe the man kind of just on the rocks, right? And it seems that when you look a little bit closer too, for example, he has bite marks on his wrist, possibly from the snake.
Yeah.
And then there's a bird of some kind with its body slit, the blood pouring into a chalice, the knife at the side. But nonetheless, this gentleman, this man, this human, or I don't even, like, I'm kind of even questioning the human part because he has feathers sprouting from his ear. So I'm like, okay, is this
Yeah.
supposed to be Greek oriented? Is this supposed to be like
Yeah.
Hermes or something, or someone very similar? You start digging more into the piece and you start discovering various layers to the piece with really, if I may be fair, if I may be transparent, the only prevailing detail other than the bear being inside the cave, being in deep hibernation, and the forest setting ablaze behind him, really the only detail that I'm seeing that seemed to prevail was the forest burning in the background while this man was more painfully in rest. And then
Yeah.
I'm not sure if like the fur over his over his torso, to kind of provide a little bit of censorship. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be a reference to the bear, but I thought that was interesting too after hearing your commentary just now. So, of course, if I may ask, what about these certain details throughout the entire album cover, whether it be the bird, the chalice with the blood, the man itself, the man and his like wing ears, the snake, how do all these elements, how do all these visual assets like connect the songs and then compress that into what is Insomnia? And this is just like from a very creative standpoint because I'm curious upon the depths with this piece.
Yeah. So my initial idea of the bear and the fire was a very basic idea of chaos within peace. And since we had to reconstruct an idea, and since Kellum had to resort to books to transform my emotions and my ideas into something else, or rather he came up with a lot of elements that represented what I was feeling. So the person that is in a restful state is actually, I had to Google it because I couldn't remember, is actually Hypnos, the Greek god of sleep. And
Okay.
that's why he has the feathers. That's the representation of that of that uh, of that god.
Okay.
And a lot of other elements in the artwork itself are representations that, according to his studies and his knowledge, represents something that I told him I was feeling while writing Insomnia. So
Okay.
you can say that the cover itself does not represent insomnia. Actually, none of what, or almost none of the songs represent insomnia. It represents the consequences that I
Yeah.
felt with
Okay.
insomnia.
Fair
And
enough.
since insomnia was the last thing that I actually chose for the album, I wrote everything, and in the end, I got a couple of album titles sent to the guys and said, any of these I like, so let's choose one.
Yes.
So it's not, the art is not a representation of the title, but rather of the contents that are within the album, the
Right.
emotions and all the feelings that I had while writing it.
Beautiful.
There's a lot of elements that I can't recall because I'm not that. I have bad memory because of insomnia, and and because I'm not as as uh, as good as he is knowing all these elements and their meanings, but
Gotcha.
everything in the art has a meaning.
Fantastic. Well, I do appreciate you providing me the insight that you have with this album cover as well. Of course, the music is one thing, but the visual assets, the photography, the cinematography, the music videos, the physical merch, all of that ends up being a marketable and tangible, right? It ends up being a tangible and potentially profitable representation of what the music is. So as someone who has always been fascinated with Renaissance, Romantic, Victorian, just overall paintings of that remind you of the Sistine Chapel, paintings and an aesthetic that has prevailed at least throughout the 2020s and going into the later 2010s for any and all counterculture music artists. It is always fascinating over time to see artists like Caesar Aldrian, Orion Cantor, and Kalen Stokermans prevail in that exact aesthetic and provide metal bands gorgeous pieces like this. So thank you for providing me the depths. Thank you for providing me the insight that comes with the album cover for the glorious metal band, the glorious metal album, the 10-track album that is Insomnia. So we more or less covered the explanation for why this album is called Insomnia. Well, the tracks and the ideas contained within what is 10 songs worth of music, it reviews and recollects upon a conscious acknowledgement, the consequences of what happens when you do deprive yourself of rest. Any living being on this planet needs rest. And when you're able to accomplish it without working too hard, or for me, because I have sleeping issues as well, when you're able to accomplish sleep and accomplish rest without having to actually sit still for 2 hours on the floor, flat on your back, let the melatonin release, then turn on your side, go to sleep, hope you don't snore. There's so much behind it. There's a reason why there's a whole science behind sleep these days, especially for Americans, because, well, our health is shit, at least for the majority of us. It could be better. That's what I'll kind of humble it down to, is that it could be better, but it's not the greatest right now. We start out with the track Hypnopompic. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, I do think so.
Cool. So I do remember that this is an instrumental. So more or less, I can imagine that the instrumental is meant to encompass the more ominous, more like frightening, more haunting, but also still impactful aesthetic musically that this album is supposed to encompass. Can I confirm that, or were there meant to be different emotions that were invoked even through this 1 minute 25-second intro?
No, actually, that intro was supposed to represent exactly what it represents, which is somewhat of a horror, nightmarish awakening.
Gotcha.
It wasn't made on complete purpose, because this was one of the tracks that I tried to help build, and by sheer luck, it actually turned out to be what I wanted it to be. And it's called Hypnopompic, which is the medical or scientific term for the precise moment before you awake.
Gotcha.
And it's inspired on the fact that I've been so deprived of sleep and so tired that I've actually had what Dr. Google calls hypnopompic hallucination, which is not being able to separate true life from being asleep.
Ooh.
When I talk about this with people, they normally confuse it or think of it being sleep paralysis, but it's different.
It's
Not
different.
sleep paralysis. Yeah, it's different. Sleep paralysis, which I also have, you are in a conscious state, but your body is numb and still completely frozen. Hypnopompic hallucination, part of your brain starts functioning, so you get triggers that make your dreams feel like pure reality. So an hypnopompic hallucination, you can smell during sleep. You can feel people touching you. You can hear actual people speaking with you. Every sensation you can feel in real life, you can feel during sleep, and it's
Right.
very scary. It's very scary.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I can only compare and relate to your conversation or apply myself to your conversation by saying that I have a precognition. Most of the time it's 2 years in advance, but I dream very lucidly on a common basis, and it's oftentimes exhausting to keep track of the dreams that I have because they can be so real sometimes, whether they're good dreams or bad dreams. And then on top of that, depending on how many I don't keep track of, well, then I also have deja vu later in time, maybe a year or two after that. And it's insane. It's insane how complex sleep science can be, both on a scientific and a spiritual level. But please continue, sir.
Yeah, that's basically it. Hypnopompic was inspired on those hallucinations that I had like 2 or 3 times, and were completely frightening, and were part of the reason why I seek help for this sleep disorder.
Right.
So it would make sense to actually start this album with that title and something that represented a horror-ish awakening of something.
Yeah.
So I consider it the awakening of the rest of the songs, the album itself.
Sweet. Track 2, we have Slaves to a Machine, which really, other than a flicker of life, and let's see, I do believe it was there was a flicker of life, the art of war, and I think, yeah, Slaves to a Machine. So Slaves to a Machine was my beginning. I think my favorite song off of this album so far would either be The Art of War or Slaves to a Machine, but by all means, sir, tell us what you can about track 2.
Slaves to a Machine is more of it obviously talks about work life and corporate life and technology, and why it's in the album is because I grew to hate technology. I grew to hate corporate life. I grew to hate working in general.
Yeah.
Because since I'm always exhausted, always tired, I do not have patience for technology. I do not have patience to work, and I do not have patience for corporate work. I still work at corporate work, and I do it with pride because I have to work and I have to provide, and I try to be my best self even if I don't agree with something. But Slave to the Machine talks about all my frustration of being complete puppets to huge companies that do not respect your health, your free time, your personal time, and eventually destroy every single piece of happy moments that you should be living until you have nothing else to tell. You're old and you've lived your whole life working just to make money and not enjoy your life with your family, with your friends. So it's put in a way that represents my frustration towards that because of being so tired all the time, but still having to work and still having to put up with stuff that normal people maybe would cope with, but I couldn't because I was tired. And yeah, in a nutshell, that's it.
Yeah. And I mean, North Americans can attest to this. Most people around the world can attest to this by now, because we all have to work hourly wage jobs, and if not, it's commission, but the work is a little bit more difficult. We are all compelled and become familiar with insomnia because we are constantly slaves to a machine until we aren't. And then by the time you aren't, well, it's either because you're enslaving someone else through labor, through whatever creative medium you're doing, which is an awful it's an awful viewpoint of the world. And I know many of us wish it wasn't that way, but even when you don't have to be a slave to the machine yourself, other people still have to be. And that's what can easily conjure insomnia for any man, woman, or just human on this planet. It's difficult for all of us, and therefore there's a specific term for it, but just the idea of when you get home, whether you're a closing shift or an opening shift or a mid-shift person, oftentimes you just want to stay up all night, because otherwise it feels like you don't have the time to do anything with your family, friends, or loved ones. And that's just, it's such a terrible thing. It's such a terrible thing to acknowledge and have to absorb that type of stuff like a sponge. But at the end of the day, until all the world government shut down, we all have to work. We all have to work. So good on you for writing a song like that for this album, because I think it's definitely a big contributor to insomnia, having to be a slave to the machine. Track 3, we have A Flicker of Life. Which, you know what? A Flicker of Life was the one with the demon in it, right? No.
No. The demon, you mean the half goat thing?
Yeah.
No, that was on singles. That was the dark side of truth.
That's right. Okay, that's right. That makes so much sense. I'm like, why am I not seeing it on the track list? Am I just misplacing the song name? But
actually, it was Unholy Catastrophe.
Oh, right. Unholy Catastrophe. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It's too late for me to remember.
It's getting there for you too, friend. So track 3, A Flicker of Life. What is this one talking about?
Flicker of Life is somewhat of conceptual idea that we would flip sleep and the sleep state and the being awake state. And what I try to write with A Flicker of Life is that if I could, I would rather be, or let me put it in a different way. Normally people love to be awake, love to do stuff, and that's just how it is. In this song, I tried to portray a different view of me preferring to be on a sleep state and not wanting to be awake. So flipping it upside down and imagining that all we could actually do was during sleep, and during the awake state, it was where we rested. It's called a flicker of life because I feel that whenever I think I'm reaching a good state of sleep, there's always a flicker of life that wakes me up.
Yeah, fair enough.
And puts me again through hell and hell until with no end, basically.
Right. A flicker of life can compel insomnia because of restlessness in general. Like what brings insomnia to the forefront of your mind, just maybe not feeling like you've accomplished that much in a day in a 24-hour cycle. Even if it's not you being a slave to the machine, sometimes a flicker of life is like the last thing you need before you get some rest. Maybe you spark an idea in your head and, well, you're restless because of that. So many things I can relate to. It's not even funny. And that's why I knew that this was going to be one of those albums for me. Like one of the albums I've loved since its release. Like I can't get enough of this album, really. And most likely with the instrumental out, I will be doing some vocal covers of songs on this record here pretty soon. Now, track 5, Insomnia. One of the best title tracks I've heard in recent years. I say that a lot, but the thing is, when an album has a good title track, it makes the rest of the album so much easier to enjoy. Now, Insomnia is another one of those instrumentals, but this one just bounces all over the place. Maybe in a musical sense, it's supposed to embody just bouncing back and forth and not being able to stay still. I'm not too sure. But that's definitely the vibe I got with it the first couple times of listening to it, if not just it being an overall fun track. It's like, well, if you're going to be restless, you might as well just dance around. You might as well just spend your energy in a resourceful way, be fun with it, and then just absolutely collapse at some point. So what's going on creatively speaking, because if not lyrically speaking, what was the mindset behind writing Insomnia the way that you boys did? And this can be a question for both Nelson and Daniel, being that you both are in session tonight.
Yeah. Well, Daniel can contribute on this one since there's no lyrics, but we wanted to have an instrumental song in the middle because we also know that at a certain point, so many blast beats and down-tuned guitars and low vocals listening to the full album can be exhausting. And we wanted to put something instrumental in the middle, not only to ease a bit of my work for writing, but also to let some air into the middle of the album, so we can breathe. The listener can breathe. Why the song is as is more on on Andre, who composed most of it, and Raul the drums. But I think that the fact that we knew right away that it was going to be instrumental, that took the song creation to a different path, not so oriented to something to put vocals on. And maybe that's the reason why it bounces front to back and that sense that you mentioned. Not sure if anyone wants to put an input on it, but
Yeah, I think that it kind of blends everything that all the other songs are in this album in terms of instrumental. It is. I mean, it's on the right spot because it's kind of, I don't know. It has this triplets vibe as well that you get on The Art of War as well. And yet it has all these orchestral and classical like elements on it. Like you hear all these production elements that Andre created for them, and I mean the blast beats are all like blended in just one song, all type of so the entire style of drumming is like all compressed into one song, and I think it's like that's what it is. It's like an instrumental that kind of has all these elements of other songs.
Right. So if
For me, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, even if it's just speaking for yourself, because it is the title track, it ended up being the title track. It ended up being a lyricless, a vocalist, instrumental, because it's meant to kind of compact everything together. It's meant to bring everything together. It's almost as if halfway through the album, well, everything's kind of in a common orbit around the title track. And from a musical writing standpoint, not that I actually know anything about musical writing or musical composition, but it's definitely compelling. It's definitely inspiring that you guys decided to have everything work together and come together in one song like you did. So I do appreciate the feedback that you both of you provided with the title, the instrumental title track, the vocalist title track. Track 6, we have Hell's Black Heart. Now, Nelson, we are back to you. What's going on here lyrically, my friend?
dear God, Hell's Black Heart. Hell's Black Heart is probably it. If I had to put every demon that's inside my head, especially during the night, outside and incarnate them as people, what would they do to humanity? And Hell's Black Heart is as if I opened the gate to hell, and everything that's inside hell, and inside hell would be all these emotions, negative emotions, all these feelings, everything would come out to actually destroy everything and that crossed their path. And I wanted to. I actually I didn't want to write this. I wrote it because it felt right. Because I learned fairly recently that the best remedy to negative emotions and to sorrow and whatnot is to let it out. So obviously, if we're talking about real life, let it out is speaking out, is crying, is telling a friend what you're feeling. But I wanted to represent this in obviously a very metal way, and a way that felt or that represented the chaos that that song instrumentally was.
Gotcha.
So I decided to make this metaphoric story that I opened the gates of hell, which is pretty cliche already, but all the souls that come out of this from this gate are actually all these emotions, are all the sorrow and all the pain embodied into people that would actually consume the whole world, and in a way making hell a peaceful place for the first time in life.
Fair enough. And here's the thing too, you mentioned briefly that it might sound cliche that you're comparing your sleeping issues, your sleeping disorder to that of hell. But really, it's only cliche to those who don't understand.
True.
Simple enough. It's only cliche, it's only corny to those like myself before who didn't really understand what it was to be sleepless, what it was to stay up for possibly even 2 days straight and see the strain that that does to the mind, the potential strain that that can do to the mind, as well as just being anxious, being stressed, being depressed, and just having the gravity of your surroundings weigh down upon you, whether through responsibility, whether through mindless enslavement, being a slave to a machine, the obligation to keep pushing forward despite how difficult it might be to do so sometimes. Well, that ends up being hell's black heart. That's why hell's heart is so freaking charcoal black, is because though the struggle oftentimes ends up being worth it, sometimes there are things that you just shouldn't have invested into, and that you only realize that at the very end, and that's why then your heart can possibly turn cold, turn steel cold, turn stone cold, as well as black, and just filled with ash, filled with soot, filled with sulfur, all that stuff. Track 7, we have The Art of War. Which, if I'm being honest, I think this is the track, like especially with the darker background, the pile of corpses seemingly, or the pile of whatever you were standing upon. I think this is the song that had me thinking, okay, this is very Thy Art is Murder vibes. Like, this reminds me hella of Thy Art is Murder, but they're from Portugal. I really want to get them on my podcast now, and here we are. Lyrically speaking, what is The Art of War trying to allude to, lyrically speaking?
Well, The Art of War was inspired by, at the moment, when I wrote it, was very inspired by the Russian-Ukrainian war. And the fact that I felt for the first time in adulthood war so close to me, so close to my country, actually made me rethink of how serious the consequences of war really are. Because when you're young, you don't think much of the news that, oh, there's war here and war there.
Yeah.
Or you think, but you don't
understand.
You don't understand. You don't feel it personally. When you get older, you start feeling it, and when you, for the first time, see it so close, being Ukraine, one country in Europe that, we on tour we actually passed Ukraine, so we've been there. It makes you rethink a lot about war and how it works, and the art of war talks about just the mindless, how idiot. I mean, I'm short for words even. How stupid humanity can be and greedy to actually end the life of millions of people, including innocent children, just for pure interests. And at the time it affected me, I was in a state where emotionally that affected me, so I felt the need to talk about it. Also, at the time I already had my son on the way, I believe, so probably that had also some weight to it, as in seeing little children being dragged on the floor in Ukraine and thinking, what if that was my son? And only when you put yourself on someone else's shoes like that, you actually get to feel the empathy for
You feel the impact.
the impact. So I decided to write The Art of War, which is inspired in a book title, but it doesn't resemble anything on book contents. And it talks about just how ignorant it is to create war. The only interests are those who are not affected by war. And basically talking about the innocent.
Gotcha.
And that's basically.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's really good commentary. No, like for me, I've come to understand in life that conflict is indeed necessary. But the wars that we wage today are in vain. Like there's no reason for half of the conflicts that we're having on a worldwide scale right now. And what I do appreciate is that from a more political standpoint, the side of the table that I end up kind of sticking by, but I don't exactly grab a seat and sit down on that side of the table, if that makes sense. That side of the table that I more or less am against the wall on. Just so that side of the room, that's a better term. That side of the room that I'm politically on, even those folks are kind of acknowledging now, and they're like, yo, we don't need to be fighting and killing nearly as much, if not at all. Like everybody's tired of it. Everybody's ready to stop using labels to divide each other, especially over here in the US, because it's a big friggin' issue. Everybody's kind of done of utilizing these certain titles and these certain political alignments, when at the end of the day, more and more people every single day are realizing, they're understanding that, politically speaking, for the US, it's all about divide and conquer. It's not about keeping anybody unified. It's about dividing us and turning us against each other, when in reality, half the major events like 9/11, a good portion of these shootings that have been happening over here in the US, so much of that shit is just to continue dividing us and to continue encouraging violence and continue encouraging chaos. And it's just so fucked up. Like we all hate being a part of it now, and we're slowly learning to overcome that, see beyond what's going on, and do our best to counteract it from ever happening again. So that's just, that's my kind of political rant for the podcast. But
and I do understand what you mean by conflict being necessary. Obviously, the thing is that the other portion of the innocent have to suffer because of said conflict is unnecessary and just mindless. There's
right.
other ways of solving conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I was definitely meaning to to ground that a little bit more on my end, just like with my own perspective. Conflict is necessary because that means there is a difference in ideology, philosophy, religion, political aspect between people. What isn't necessary in conflict is when basically you're looking to invade a country, no matter what country it is, invading another country, and basically just pillaging them for their resources and killing their innocent people. That part of conflict, that's not right. Now, of course, when there is a collective threat, for example, during World War II, it was the Nazis, right? We can all acknowledge and understand and accept that they were the common bully. They were the common bad guy because they were so hell-bent on wiping a population, wiping a culture from the planet, that they were willing to do anything to accomplish that. When we all gathered on a worldwide scale, we even gathered with Russia, right? At the time, we even teamed up with Russia, and we defeated the Nazis. We sent them into hiding, and for whatever reason, we now house them over here. I don't fucking get why. That is a more necessary conflict, because that was a party of people who were quite literally out to eradicate and, with great prejudice, wipe a race, wipe a culture from the planet because of some petty fucking reasons. Today, we just go to war for oil. Like, why? Why are children's hospitals in Syria getting carpet bombed for oil? Why is all this happening? It's not necessary. So therefore, the art of war, as opposed to World War II, where it became a pretty sophisticated signature, now the wars today, to me, are more or less just mindless scribbles. And it's just like something to fill in the page. And it's like, no, we don't want to fucking do this anymore. So I like that basically the art of war compels Insomnia, because it's like, well, so many people today are restless from PTSD. They are desensitized and they're traumatized from getting their own homes destroyed, mainly Ukraine. You mentioned the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which is very, very important because it is such a ruthless bullying between two countries, and it's such a ruthless pissing match between two countries. Meanwhile, children are dying. It's awful. It's not a great thing for either side. And I'm really hoping that by the end of this year, we can go ahead and get that resolved. We can get that finalized. We can conquer that conflict and just be fucking done with it. And it's what's really, really personal to me is when basically the Russia-Ukraine conflict throughout multiple countries and the respective artists I've hosts from those countries, including Seeing Things, which is from Czechoslovakia, when they're actively talking about how depressing it is to understand that that's still going on, that's when you know it's a worldwide issue. And I think there are going to be a lot of changes that occur that happen to revolve around that same conflict. But really, I'm just hoping for it to be done by the end of the year, because possibly, like, you know, disclaimer, I don't know anything because I'm not a federal agent. I'm not anybody in authority. I'm not a police officer. I am not an active serviceman. I'm nothing like that. But I fear that my own country is about to go to civil war here pretty soon. So we love that. We love that. And mainly the people versus the government, which is reassuring in some ways, because that means if that does happen, and if it happens in a productive way, then that means we can kind of reform what's going on upstairs, politically speaking. But otherwise, if it's just if it's a more dramatic version of divide and conquer, then there's absolutely no reason for it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So here's to that. Here's to hoping we don't have to go to civil war. But if it's with our government, let's fucking do it. Disclaimer, this is just my opinion. I'm pretty sure something in the algorithm will probably fucking dox this episode because of that. But freedom of press, motherfuckers. For freedom of speech. It's not a threat, you know, to anybody officially. It's just my own personal perspective on it, and if that gets me doxxed, then so fucking be it. Track 8 out of 10 on this beautifully depressing album. We have Sleep Paralysis.
Honestly, this interlude bridge to the next song, and we didn't have a title for it, and I'm not gonna say we have maybe I just gave it the name and bridge to the next song. Not gonna try to justify something that's not true. So I gave it a name. That was something that I've been through, something that represented Insomnia, something that was feeling.
Yeah.
So it's just an interlude that I gave it a name.
Gotcha. Okay. Sounds good. And is there no lyrical content on this song then?
No, it's an interlude.
Oh, okay. Jesus. Sorry. Track 9, we have A Dying Age. What is this one about?
A Dying Age is precisely everything that represents the more modern era. And A Dying Age is the first time where I divided the lyrics into topics that all represent something to me. But it talks about technology in children.
Okay.
Well, I felt that because of being a father recently, but the fact that we are starting to get dumber and dumber day by day as humanity, I feel that technology and the modern age isn't making us necessarily, well, globally speaking, and not in a very broad way. Obviously, not everyone. But we are not getting smarter because of technology when we should. And it also talks politically, where we see that I even wrote in a part, truth bringers. What was it? Chaos keepers uncontrolled, truth bringers, mouth shut closed. And it talks about politics. I have no idea what I had in my mind about politics back then, but it made sense. It talks about technology making us dumber and giving a space for what I consider, obviously this is my opinion, complete idiots to spread all these stupid theories that don't help humanity in no way. And yeah, that's basically it. Grabbing the modern age that we live and seeing that it's slowly dying because of technology, because of whatever is happening politically, whatever is happening technologically, whatever is happening in freedom of speech online.
Yeah.
Which is different from freedom of speech that we know, and I don't know. The internet and the freedom of speech has come to a point where, well, people don't just say things and have everybody believe, you know?
Right.
This shouldn't be happening. There's no source of truth anymore. You look at any type of news, a newspaper online or a website, and you're
Yeah.
not sure if what you're reading is true.
Right.
You're not sure what you should believe.
The uncertainty of truth compels one to insomnia because technology has brought us into de-evolution, and there is such a censorship issue and such a deprivation of the truth that it almost leaves one restless, and then it leaves one as an insomniac, thinking and trying to figure out what is the truth. It's that crime scene pin board with all the pictures, right? Like, that's basically us trying to look for the truth these days. And now over here in the US specifically, one example I could provide is TikTok. As a social media platform,
Exactly.
they've been trying to convince us for the longest time that it's supervised by the Chinese Communist Party, but I'm pretty sure that's bullshit. And I'm pretty sure what's going on instead is you're seeing, we are seeing them trying to pluck a truthful source from us because it's independently ran, like it's independently distributed. So just wanted to go on a brief TikTok rant and say that, well, I mean, the fact that they're trying to take such a transparent and sometimes dark web friendly platform, but nonetheless a truthful platform, a transparent platform, it seems that at least over here in the US and North America, they're trying to pluck one of those very, very vital sources that lets us know what's going on the inside before these stories even reach the news. They hate that shit. And I know that a lot of people will be very, very uneasy, anxious, even stressed, knowing that the only sources of information that we have are either going to be like the Tucker Carlson network, or, you know, basically networks and platforms that are manned. And this is just for US local stuff. I'm not sure like where you guys get your news, and like if you guys have resources you feel like you can trust. But over here, it's like it now breaks down to personalities that you can kind of trust, but you have to take with a grain of salt the information that they do distribute. So because of that, it brings us into a very, very deteriorating age, and therefore a dying age, an age of ashes, where its future is very uncertain on a daily basis, and that's not good for anybody. So that's kind of the commentary, and like basically me just trying to understand and apply my own psyche to the songs at hand and their lyrical contents. I don't know if you have anything you wanted to say.
No, I just love that I'm trying to explain stuff that I can barely explain because they're very metaphoric and conceptual, and it's late and I can barely speak Portuguese, let alone English.
Right.
And then you proceed to describe exactly what I would like to have said initially.
That's cool. That's very reassuring to understand that I understand someone else's interpretation of English. Like, this is just speaking for linguistics. It's always a concern to me that I'll misinterpret what they're trying to say, because English is such a complex clusterfuck of vocabulary. Even I'm still learning how to speak English in some aspects. But then when I'm not, well, I'm trying to learn the language of other cultures. That way I can become more linguistic and understand the pattern that bounces across all of the world's languages. So thank you for offering and like unintentionally providing me comfort in me confirming, me knowing that I can understand and kind of interpret what you're trying to say. Did you have any other commentary for A Dying Age?
Not really. Not really.
Well, in that case, we have the final track for Insomnia. This glorious, this ominous, this sleep-deprived album made by the Voynich Code, embodied the musical embodiment of mystery, based out of Portugal, Spain, signed recently to 2 Unique Leader Records, and this album has been out since Friday the 13th of last year. which that was a very big weekend. And I would say that out of all the albums that did release, this was absolutely the best one that did come out. So our last track that we have is, quote, "A Letter to My Future Self." Now, not often, I want to bring this to everybody's attention. Not often do you, I think, get more direct, more poetic installments or poetic-based musical material from a metal band with something as blatant as "A Letter to My Future Self." So, of course, that's really what makes an album like this a time lapse for me. That's what makes it so mysterious, is because of a title, a song name like that. So what did you want to write a letter to your future self? Like, what did you want to write in that letter regarding the conclusion of Insomnia?
A letter to my future self digs very deep in emotionally, because it talks about my parents. It talks about the fact that I don't live, obviously, anymore with my parents for I don't know how many years, and I left my father, who was someone that I dearly love from the bottom of my heart, with a person who I call mother, that basically, I'm trying to find words to describe it, sorry. But my father is in a mentally abusive relationship with my mother.
Gotcha.
And I've been a part of that abuse when I was a kid as well. And I know what it's like to be with that person, and what it's like to be the person suffering from that abuse. And A Letter to My Future Self talks about the fact that I am weak and unable to support my father at this moment, knowing perfectly that he is in that abusive state and relationship.
Gotcha.
I obviously do my best to help, but the thing is, I can barely help myself.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I know that I'm going to blame myself for not doing more for my father. And that's why it's called A Letter to My Future Self. And the lyrics itself dig pretty deep into the fact that I couldn't, well, predicting the future, couldn't help my father more than I do right now.
Yeah.
And knowing that I'm going to regret it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, one lesson that I've always tried to teach my loved ones, my friends, my family as of recently, is that there's only so much you can do for other people before you help yourself first, and before you navigate yourself through tragedy first. But nonetheless, when you're anticipating a more dreadful future for your loved ones, your family, even yourself, naturally you would want to write a letter to your future self and just be like, hey, it's gonna be okay, just push through it just like we always have. It's kind of creepy in that way, because that just means that in that moment you acknowledged and anticipated with great pessimism possibly a more negative mindset, a more negative viewpoint, the glass half empty, really.
Yeah.
In that moment, you're saying, well, things are going to get worse. I know they're going to get worse, even though I don't actually know they're going to get worse. I have a feeling they'll get worse. So please just bear through it the same way that I'm doing now, despite my insomnia, despite my restlessness, seeing these things and how they could unfold around me. Please, just push through it. That shit's important. That really is. And in that way, many people might listen to this record and say, it's a pretty cool album cover. Pretty cool music. Kind of sounds like Ginger Shadow of the Tent. That guy on the cover, is that Hermes? Like, they'll notice those smaller details. But I think because of situations like this, not to toot my own horn, but like I love digging deeper like this. I think a lot more people will come to appreciate this record and really anything you have from this point on, because of A Future Letter to Myself being the concluding track. And I mean, really, after all of that, after doing track by track lyrical analysis for what is Insomnia, a legendary record released Friday the 13th, 2023, quote, after conducting a lobotomy lyrically for Insomnia, and after us concluding the first half of the podcast session talking about bands that inspired all of the members in the Voynich Code, what do you think distinguishes Insomnia from other iconic records relevant to metal, in your own personal opinion?
Well, my personal opinion is emotion. It's as heartfelt as possible. If I could actually remove my heart and my mind from my body and put it in something, in a record, it's that. You're not gonna feel, see, hear any hypocrisy. It's pure Nelson in that album, and I gave all my best writing all those lyrics, and we all gave our best writing this album. And picking up a bridge from a letter to my future self, if you want to feel what I mean by this, the last bar from the lyrics that I quote, distant memories, not too far to reach, reminding me of all I've lost. I won't forgive myself for giving up on you. We will meet again one day in hell. And try to feel what I was feeling when I recorded that with the lyrics, and I think you'll understand that I try to be myself through emotion.
Yeah.
And that's what maybe stands our band out from others in metal.
Right.
We don't find that much emotion and truthfulness in a band.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah, of course. And like, even just yesterday when we were doing a session with Parasitic Embodiment, Drake Gambo was like, well, I'm not trying to be egotistical, but like, I think this album's authentic. There's no ego associated with it. This is something that you invested, that you and all three of the other members, that being Daniel, Vinny, and Andre, this is an album you guys invested a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of creative energy into. So by appreciating this album, I don't think that's ego at all. I think that's just you being able to appreciate what you've invested your time, money, and energy into. So kudos to you for at least being able to be present enough in the moment beyond that letter to your future self, right? I think it's very important to appreciate what you've accomplished, kind of stew in that for a little bit in the best way possible, and then look into resurrecting more mysterious vibes, the ambience of mystery that makes the Voynich Code what it is going forward and sustaining its legacy. question 4, I guess in this case, 4 part 2 would be, how did Insomnia become an album instead of an EP? And really, I just asked this for the sake of the time duration of it, the creative process. Like, how did this become an album instead of an EP?
Well, there were 2 reasons actually. It just made sense to write an album since we've released an EP, then an album, then an EP again. So this would be an album. Also, we wanted to release more songs, and truthfully, it had to be an album because Unique Leader Records said you have to put out an album if you want to really stand out. And well, an album it is.
An album is, exactly.